My name is Leo Vance. I'm 20 years old and I live in Ashmont, Ohio, a town where stories stick to you like mud on your boots. My story is about my car, but it's not just any car. It's a 1978 Mercury Comet, a beast of a machine, painted a faded seafoam green with a white vinyl top that's cracked like an old road map. It was my grandpa's car. He bought it brand new the year my dad was born, and he loved it more than anything else he owned, except maybe his fishing boat. When he passed away 2 years ago, he left it to me. It wasn't just a car, it was a legacy. It smelled like his old cigars and the peppermints he always kept in the glove compartment. Every squeak of the suspension and every rumble of the V8 engine was a piece of him. I spent my weekends learning how to tune the carburetor, change the oil, and polish the chrome until it gleamed under the weak Ohio sun. I was studying mechanical engineering at Ashmont Community College, mostly because this car had taught me to love how things worked. It was my connection to him, a 4,000-pound steel memory that I was determined to protect. My world was pretty simple: classes, a part-time job stocking shelves at the grocery store to pay for gas and parts, and evenings spent with my head under the hood of the Comet. It was a quiet life, a responsible one, and I was content with it. The problem began on a Tuesday afternoon in the cavernous, mostly empty concrete parking garage at the college. I had a 2-hour break between my physics lecture and my calculus tutorial, so I was sitting in the back seat of the Comet, which doesn't have any window tints, making it a complete fishbowl for anyone to see into. I was just putting on some deodorant, trying to freshen up before my next class, when a newer, shiny black sedan whipped into the spot next to me. The garage was maybe a quarter full, with dozens of wide-open spaces on every level, yet this person chose to park right beside me, squeezing in way too close. I watched through the rear window, slightly annoyed, as a girl got out. She couldn't have been much older than me. She slung a heavy-looking designer backpack over her shoulder and, without a single thought or a moment of care, threw her door open. The sound was sickening. It wasn't a gentle tap, it was a loud metallic crack that I felt in my teeth. The edge of her door slammed directly into the rear passenger side door of the Comet. My heart jumped into my throat. I watched, frozen in disbelief, as she squeezed herself out of the car. As she did, her bulky backpack scraped hard against my side mirror, tilting it downwards. She didn't even flinch. She didn't look, she didn't pause, she just adjusted her bag, slammed her own door shut, and walked away towards the campus elevators, completely oblivious, or worse, completely indifferent. For a moment I just sat there, my mind blank with shock. Did that really just happen? The disrespect was so blatant, so casual, it felt like a physical blow. This wasn't just a car, it was my grandfather's pride and joy. It had survived 40 years without a single major dent, and this girl, in her rush to get to wherever she was going, had wounded it without a second thought. She was my nemesis before I even knew her name. The problem I had to solve wasn't just about a dent. It was about the profound lack of respect, the carelessness that felt like a personal insult to me and to the memory of my grandpa. I was deeply, fundamentally unsatisfied, and I knew I couldn't just let it go. My first instinct was to jump out and confront her, but my brain was still catching up to what my eyes had seen. By the time I scrambled out of the back seat and onto the concrete floor, she was gone, vanished into the stairwell. I walked around to the side of the Comet and my stomach dropped. There it was, a sharp, ugly gash in the seafoam green paint right on the curve of the door panel. It was about the size of a silver dollar, a deep white scar where her door had impacted, surrounded by a spiderweb of cracked paint. It was worse than I thought. The metal was pushed in, creased in a way that I knew would be a nightmare to fix. I touched it gently, my fingers tracing the damage. A wave of hot anger washed over me, followed by a cold, hollow feeling. This was my fault. I was supposed to be the protector of this car, and I had failed. For the rest of the day I couldn't focus. In calculus, the numbers and equations just looked like meaningless squiggles. All I could see was that dent, that white scar on the green paint. My first attempt to solve the problem was to be rational. I told myself it was just an accident. College kids are careless. Our cars are both old hand-me-downs, just like the original thought in my head. Maybe her car was just as beat up. But I couldn't shake the image of her fancy backpack and her dismissive attitude. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a symptom of a bigger problem, a world where people just don't care about anyone or anything but themselves. The next day I started my own quiet investigation. I knew her car, a black sedan newer than mine with a small dreamcatcher hanging from the rearview mirror. I started watching for it in the parking garage. It took 3 days, but I finally saw it again, parked just as terribly, taking up 2 spots this time. I found a spot a few rows away and just waited. I needed to see her again to put a name to the face. Eventually she came back with a group of friends, all of them laughing loudly, their voices echoing in the garage. I got a good look at her. Let's call her Cassie. She had this air of effortless entitlement, like the world was her personal playground and the rest of us were just background characters. I decided my next step was to find out who she was. I took a picture of her license plate, and using a service my dad had for his own small business, I managed to get a name and a student ID number. Cassandra Thorne. I looked her up on social media. Her profiles were a parade of expensive vacations, designer clothes, and parties. Her car, which I had assumed was a hand-me-down, was a gift for her 19th birthday. There were pictures of it with a giant red bow on the hood. This wasn't some struggling student with a junker car. This was someone who had everything and appreciated nothing. The anger started to burn hotter. My next hurdle was figuring out how to confront her. I couldn't just walk up to her and accuse her. I needed to be smart about it. I found out her class schedule through a friend who worked in the registrar's office. I saw she had a public speaking class in the humanities building every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. My plan was simple. I would catch her after class, be calm and reasonable, and just ask for her insurance information. That was the mature thing to do. That was what my grandpa would have wanted. I waited for her outside the lecture hall, my heart pounding in my chest. When she came out chatting with her friends, I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice a little shakier than I wanted. "Cassandra." She stopped and looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Do I know you?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. "My name is Leo," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A few days ago in the parking garage, you opened your door into my car. You made a pretty big dent." Her friends giggled. Cassie just stared at me, then let out a short, sharp laugh. "Are you serious?" she said. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "I saw you," I insisted. "You were parked right next to me in the north garage, level 2. You have a black sedan with a dream catcher." Her smile vanished. "Look, I don't know who you are, but my car didn't touch your rusty old bucket, and even if it did, what are you going to do about it? You got any proof?" I was stunned into silence. I had my own eyes, but that was it. There were no cameras in that section of the garage. It was my word against hers. "Now if you'll excuse me," she said, turning to her friends, "this creep is starting to weird me out." She pushed past me, her shoulder bumping mine, and walked away, her friends laughing behind her. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my face burning with humiliation. I had tried to do the right thing, and I had been dismissed, insulted, and called a creep in front of a hallway full of people. The original problem, the dent, had now grown into a public shaming. I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life. That was my lowest point. I drove home that day feeling completely defeated. I parked the Comet in the driveway and just stared at the dent. It seemed bigger now, uglier. It wasn't just a dent anymore, it was a monument to my failure. It was a symbol of her victory over me. I had been made a fool of, and there was nothing I could do about it. I felt like I had let my grandpa down. He was a man who stood up for himself, who didn't take disrespect from anyone. And here I was, his grandson, unable to even get an apology from a spoiled brat who probably wouldn't even have to pay for the damages herself. For a few days, I avoided even looking at the car. I thought about selling it. Maybe I wasn't worthy of it. Maybe I couldn't protect it. The joy I used to feel when working on it was gone, replaced by a bitter sense of shame. All the progress I thought I had made in becoming a responsible adult felt like a joke. All was lost. The dent was there to stay, and so was the memory of her laughing at me. I stewed in that feeling of helplessness for a full week. Every time I saw that dent, it was like a fresh jab of humiliation. The thought of Cassie walking around campus, thinking she had gotten away with it, that she had put me in my place, ate at me from the inside out. I tried to move on, to accept it, but I couldn't. The rational, mature approach had failed spectacularly. It had only made things worse. It was a Friday night, and I was driving home from my shift at the grocery store, feeling tired and defeated. I pulled into the college parking garage to grab a textbook I had left in my locker. It was late, almost 10 o'clock, and the garage was a ghost town. The air was still and cool, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. And then I saw it. Parked under one of those buzzing lights all by itself in a sea of empty spots was Cassie's black sedan. It was like fate was dangling the opportunity right in front of my face. My first thought was to just drive past, go home, and forget about it. But then the image of her face, twisted in a condescending smirk, flashed in my mind. I heard her voice calling me a creep, her friends' laughter echoing in the empty hallway, and I knew I couldn't let it go. This wasn't about getting her insurance information anymore. This wasn't about being mature. This was about justice. This was about wiping that smirk off her face. This was my final attempt to solve the problem, not by her rules but by mine. I parked the Comet a few spots down and just sat there for a minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I was digging deep, looking for that last bit of strength, that courage to do something I knew was wrong but felt so right. My grandpa had taught me to be a good man, but he also taught me that you have to stand up for yourself, that sometimes you have to make your own justice. I thought about the heavy, solid steel doors of the Comet. They weren't like the flimsy, lightweight doors on modern cars. They had heft, they had power. I got out of my car and walked over to hers. It was pristine, not a scratch on it except for a tiny chip on the edge of her driver's side door, probably from where it had connected with mine. The injustice of it all boiled over. I got back into the Comet and took a deep, steadying breath. I reversed carefully, then pulled forward, positioning my car perfectly alongside hers, driver's side to driver's side. Just like she had done to me, only this time it was on my terms. I looked around. The garage was completely empty, no witnesses, just me, her car, and the ghost of my grandpa, who I hoped would understand. Then I began. I grabbed my door handle and I didn't just open the door, I swung it, hard. The sound was glorious. A deep, resonant thunk as the full weight of my 40-year-old steel door slammed into the side of her modern, thin-paneled sedan. I pulled my door closed and did it again. Thunk and again, thunk. I wasn't frantic or out of control. My actions were deliberate, methodical. Each impact was a punctuation mark at the end of a long, frustrating sentence. I put all my anger, all my humiliation, and all my sense of injustice into each swing. I didn't just give her one dent. I gave her a cluster of them, a brutal, ugly constellation of damage right in the middle of her driver's side door. It was bigger, deeper, and far more noticeable than the one she had given me. It was poetic. She had given me a careless wound, I was giving her a deliberate scar. After about the fifth impact, I stopped. I opened my door one last time, gently this time, and got out to survey my work. The side of her car looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. The paint was splintered, the metal was warped into a series of deep overlapping craters. It was unmistakable, it was ugly. And it was perfect. A strange sense of calm washed over me. The burning anger in my chest was gone, replaced by cold, quiet satisfaction. I got back in the Comet, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't speed, I didn't look back. I drove up to the top level of the garage, found a spot in a far corner, and parked perfectly between the lines. The problem was solved. Maybe not in a way a guidance counselor would approve of, but it was solved nonetheless. I had taken back my power. The next few days were my new normal. I went to my classes, I went to work, but something had changed. I felt lighter. When I looked at the dent on the Comet, it didn't fill me with shame anymore. It looked like a battle scar, a reminder that I had fought back and won. I even started the process of fixing it. I ordered the original seafoam green paint online. I bought Bondo and sandpaper. Working on the car felt good again. It was an act of healing, not of hiding. A few days later, I saw her. I was walking across the quad and I saw Cassie standing by her car in the main lot, not the garage. She was on the phone, screaming. I was too far away to hear the words, but her face was red and contorted with rage. She was gesturing wildly at the massive, ugly dent in her door. She paced back and forth, furious and helpless. At one point, she looked up and her eyes scanned the campus, searching for a culprit she would never find. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition, just a shared space of campus. I didn't smile, I didn't smirk. I just held her gaze for a moment with a completely neutral expression, and then I continued walking to the library. The consequence of my action was exactly what I had hoped. She knew what it felt like to be a victim of a random, senseless act of damage, to feel that violation and powerlessness, and she had no one to blame. A month later, the dent on the Comet was almost gone. I had sanded, filled, and painted it myself. It wasn't perfect, you could still see it if you knew where to look, but it was my handiwork and I was proud of it. I was at the local auto parts store picking up a can of wax to give it the final polish. The guy behind the counter was an older fellow named Al, with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. We got to chatting about old cars. I told him a heavily edited version of my story about a friend whose car got dented. Al chuckled, a deep rumbling sound. "Yeah, that'll happen," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Some people just don't have respect for other folks' property. Sometimes the only way they learn is when it happens to them." He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "You know, it's funny you mention that. My niece was in here last week, ranting and raving. Said some complete psycho smashed in the side of her car over at the community college. Brand new car too, just laid into it for no reason at all." He shook his head. "Her name's Cassie, sweet girl but a little careless. Can you believe the nerve of some people?" My blood ran cold for a second. The world suddenly felt very, very small. I looked at Al, this friendly old mechanic who had no idea he was talking to the complete psycho. I just smiled, a slow, easy smile. "Yeah," I said, putting the can of wax on the counter. "It's unbelievable what some people will do." I paid for the wax, thanked him, and walked out into the sunshine, feeling a thrill I couldn't quite describe. The chapter was not just closed, it was sealed shut. And the Comet, my grandfather's car, gleamed in the parking lot, its new coat of wax ready to make it shine like new.